You think you understand power. You think you know how influence works. But right now, as you watch this, you're being controlled by forces you can't even see. There are 7 levels of influence. Most people are trapped in the first, screaming into the void, wondering why nobody listens. A few claw their way to the second or third, only to discover they're still prisoners, just with better cages. But here's what terrifies the people in power. There are men walking among us who've reached levels 6 and 7. They don't need to raise their voice. They don't need to explain themselves. They don't even need to be alive, and they still control your thoughts, your choices, your reality. You've been influenced by them your entire life without knowing it. Your opinions, your desires, even your rebellions, they were designed. And the sickest part, you helped build your own cage. I'm about to show you which level you're trapped in, and why the people above you are laughing while you exhaust yourself fighting shadows. But I'm warning you, once you see this hierarchy, you can never unsee it. And what you discover about yourself might be the most uncomfortable truth you've ever faced. You think you're dangerous because you speak your mind, because you refuse to follow, because you don't give a damn what anyone thinks. But let me tell you something you don't want to hear. Your rebellion is cheap. It's the cheapest form of power a man can grab. And that's why most men like you, angry, loud, confrontational, die nameless. You thought rebellion was influence, but it was just noise. You shouted, they stared. You broke rules, they whispered. You stood tall, and the world applauded for 5 seconds. Then they turned the page. Because rebellion might win attention, but it never holds it. It burns too fast. The flame that made them look is the same flame that devours you from the inside. The rebel is not feared, he's watched. And when the entertainment ends, they put you down like an animal that won't behave. Look around. Every man at the bottom thinks he's special because he's angry. They confuse rage for strength, defiance for direction. They wear their pain like armor and walk into every room swinging. But what they don't see, what you probably don't see, is that rebellion, raw and unchecked, is a prison disguised as freedom. You think you're climbing by pushing back, but you're only being contained. Rebellion attracts eyes, yes, but it also attracts punishment. It paints a target on your back. You become predictable. He'll lash out. Just wait. They don't even need to fight you. They just let you exhaust yourself. You call it principle. They call it suicide. And when your strength fades, no one remembers the reasons you screamed. They only remember how annoying it was. The rebel lives on fire, and fire is beautiful, but it's also stupid. Fire doesn't think, it consumes, and in the end it turns everything, including itself, to ash. Look at every man who tried to fight the system without a plan. Look at the ones who punched up without cover, who screamed truth without strategy. Look how they ended, broke, forgotten, dead in the street or dead inside. Maybe you don't want to hear this. Maybe you think you're different, that your cause matters, that your rebellion is righteous. But the world doesn't care about your reasons. It only sees your results. And at level 1, the level you're likely stuck in, there are no results. Just friction, resistance, and a never-ending war that you cannot win. Not because you're weak, but because you're unseen. Raw defiance without architecture always ends in tragedy. But here's the catch. The rebel feels powerful, because for the first time in your life, you're not obeying, you're not shrinking, you're not apologizing. And that feels like ascent, that feels like a breakthrough. But it's not. It's the illusion of momentum. You're still stuck in the basement, just screaming louder than the rest. Influence begins here, yes, but it cannot live here. And the tragedy is this. Some men never move past it. They spend their entire lives burning bridges they'll later need. They declare war on enemies that weren't even watching. They lose battles that never needed to be fought. And every time they fall, they blame the world. They never stop to ask, is this power or is this just fury? Rebellion is seductive, especially to the wounded, especially to those who've been ignored, underestimated, broken. It gives you a story. It gives you posture. It gives you the illusion that you're rising because you're finally making noise. But make no mistake, noise is not gravity. Noise doesn't make people follow. It doesn't build loyalty. It doesn't install you into positions of power. It gets you blocked, watched, silenced. And once you're predictable, you're controllable. They can throw you scraps to keep you barking, and you'll think you've won. You'll think you've spoken truth to power, when really, you've just given them an excuse to tighten the leash. That's level 1, raw power, untamed, beautiful, terrifying, short-lived. A dog with teeth but no leash, and when the wrong person feels threatened, they put it down without mercy. So I ask you, how long have you been stuck here? How long have you mistaken friction for influence? How many bridges have you burned to feel alive? How many eyes have watched you crash and called it passion? Be honest with yourself, because here's the danger. Level 1 feels righteous, but it's a trap set for men with fire but no strategy. They let you scream because it's better than letting you build. They let you rebel because rebellion rarely lasts. And once you're done exhausting yourself, they offer you a job, or a drink, or a leash, and you take it, because by then you're tired, you're bitter, you're broken, and the war you waged has cost you more than it gave. But there's another way. Not quieter, smarter, not weaker, calculated, not less powerful, more permanent. There is a path that takes that same fire and tempers it into a weapon. A path that transforms rebellion into rule. A way to climb past fury and into legacy. But almost no one takes it, because it requires silence. It requires patience. It requires learning how to stop being seen and start being followed. And that's where most men fail. They want the fire, but they can't stand the weight. They want to be gods, but they refuse to be ghosts first. Now listen closely, because this is where most will fall off. They will scroll away, convinced they're the exception. But if you're still here, if your ears are still open, then maybe you're not meant to die at level 1. Maybe your fire was never meant to entertain. Maybe you were born to rise higher. But before you can climb, you must understand one brutal truth about the rebel. He thinks he's untouchable right until the moment he's crushed. And yet he rises again. That's the curse of the rebel. He doesn't die once. He dies 1,000 deaths in front of 1,000 indifferent faces, and still he returns. Not because he is strong, but because he is addicted. Addicted to the illusion that pain equals progress, that noise equals notice, that resistance equals respect. He doesn't understand he's being farmed, provoked, until his fury becomes predictable, his rage becomes routine. They know his next move before he does. They tighten the leash, and he calls it oppression. But it's not oppression, it's orchestration. His rebellion was expected, mapped, accounted for. He was never a threat, just a tool. You want to know the worst part? Most rebels are applauded by the very people who want them stuck. They're called bold, raw, real. They go viral for a moment. They get platforms built on outrage, brands built on resistance, audiences hungry for drama. But none of it lasts, because rebellion without evolution becomes a parody of itself. The crowd gets bored, the algorithms shift, the angry voice becomes background noise, and the man who once lit the fire finds himself begging for sparks. That is the humiliating fate of the level 1 influencer, to scream until he becomes the static he once tried to silence. What began as defiance becomes performance. What began as power becomes puppetry. They turned your rebellion into a product, and you didn't even notice. Ask yourself, why do they always allow one rebel to rise just enough to be seen? Why do they elevate him just high enough to become symbolic, but never so high he becomes untouchable? It's not an accident, it's strategy. They choose who gets to rebel. They feed him, amplify him, let him run wild, because they know how it ends. The fall is the entertainment. The crash is the lesson. He becomes the cautionary tale for the next generation. Look what happens when you speak too loud. They let the rebel burn so others will stay cold, and the world watches him go down, not with sympathy, but with relief. Another one consumed, another one taught. But if you're still listening, that means you haven't been fully consumed. Not yet. There's something in you that suspects there's more. That influence isn't just about noise. That power isn't just defiance. Good, because what comes next is not louder, it's sharper. The rebel fails because he makes power emotional. He fights for feelings. He burns for meaning. And meaning is not influence. Influence is architecture. It is blueprints, scaffolding, timing. It is silence before speech, patience before movement, camouflage before conquest. And to access those tools, you must bury your need to be understood. You must stop performing and start constructing. This is the hardest transition, because level 1 rewards your pain. People will cheer your defiance. They'll call you brave. They'll repost your rants. They'll turn you into a moment. And moments feel like momentum. But a moment is not a movement. It doesn't last. It doesn't scale. It doesn't build anything but nostalgia. And nostalgia is for the powerless. Influence is about permanence. And permanence requires that you die to your own addiction to noise. That you kill the part of yourself that wants to be seen in flames. That you let go of the applause. Because only then can you enter the second level. The one built not on rebellion, but on creation. And here's where most men will fall again. They confuse rebellion with originality. They think breaking rules is the same as writing new ones. But they are not the same. One is destruction, the other is authorship. One tears down what offends you, the other erects what never existed. The first makes you feel powerful, the second makes you become power. Because true influence isn't about reacting, it's about designing the stage others beg to perform on. The rebel performs. The next level, he writes the script. You want to rise? Then stop trying to be the fire. Start building the forge. Stop seeking eyes. Start building structures. Let them ignore you while you lay foundations. Let them call you quiet while you draw maps. Let them forget your name while you craft the new rules. Because that silence will terrify them once the walls are built. They laughed when you rebelled. They'll kneel when you create. And only then will you start to understand the anatomy of real influence. But don't get comfortable, because creation has its own dangers. The second level seduces not with noise, but with novelty. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake invention for invincibility. And so the rebel vanishes, either by collapse or transformation, and something new begins. The innovator is born. But understand this, he does not rise from victory, but from ruin. The fire has burned out, the war cry has gone hoarse, and what remains is silence, ashes, and the unbearable question, what now? This is where most men retreat. But the few who stay, who endure the stillness, who stare into the void left by rebellion, they begin to build. And in that building, they tap into something rare, the power to shape reality. Not just resist it, not just scream at it, but replace it. This is the beginning of level 2, creation, with intent, disruption with architecture. The innovator does not destroy because he's angry. He disrupts because he knows something they don't. At this level, influence is no longer emotional, it's systemic. You stop shouting and start installing. You look at the world not with hate, but with precision. You see loopholes, weaknesses, outdated models, and instead of attacking them blindly, you outgrow them. You build something leaner, sharper, more beautiful, and the world can't help but stare. This is how movements begin, not with rebellion, but with replacement. People don't follow because you're loud. They follow because your creation works, because it answers something they didn't know they were missing, because it makes the old way look embarrassing. The rebel says, I hate this. The innovator says, here's something better. And in that moment, he becomes dangerous. But don't romanticize it. Innovation is not a clean ascent. It's lonely, it's thankless, and it's filled with traps of its own. Because the moment you create something new, you become a threat again, only now to the old kings. The institutions you just bypassed, they see you now, not as noise, but as competition. And they don't fight fair, they sue, they slander, they infiltrate, they offer to buy you out. And if you say no, they try to erase you. Welcome to level 2, where the battle shifts from public rejection to private sabotage. Your name will be whispered in boardrooms, your emails will be tracked, your allies will be turned. Because the moment you become more than a voice, when you become a system, you are no longer tolerated, you are studied, you are targeted. Most innovators don't survive this level, not because their ideas fail, but because they do. They fall in love with disruption. They start thinking that novelty is immunity, that being the first means being the best. But influence isn't given to the first, it's given to the last one standing. The graveyard of creators is filled with men who couldn't evolve their own invention, who built something brilliant, then died defending it while the imitators refined it. They thought one good idea made them gods, but the world doesn't reward sparks, it rewards systems. If you cannot scale, they will steal. If you cannot protect, they will plagiarize. And if you cannot evolve, they will erase you, and do it with your own blueprint. So what protects you? What makes an innovator endure? Two things, discipline and obscurity. Discipline to keep building while the applause fades. Obscurity to stay hidden long enough to finish, because exposure too early is death. They will praise your genius just to study how to kill it. That's the paradox of level 2. You are most powerful when unseen. The louder they applaud, the more danger you're in. And once you're copied, it doesn't matter who was first. Only who controls the infrastructure. And that's the next trap. You may build the new model, but someone else may monetize it. You may open the door, only for another man to walk through it with better shoes and a louder voice. Here's the test. Are you building for admiration or for dominion? The innovator who seeks love dies forgotten. The one who builds to reign, he becomes a legend. Because level 2 is not the final form, it is the forge. It is the place where influence stops being reactive and starts becoming strategic. And strategy always asks, what's next? You made them look, you made them listen. Good. Now can you make them stay? The answer lies in your ability to control not just ideas but systems, not just attention but resources. And that requires another transformation, because the innovator disrupts systems but the next level owns them. And ownership means war. It means contracts, betrayal, empire. You're not building products anymore. You're building machines that outlive you, and those machines will either print your legacy or swallow you whole. So ask yourself now, before the applause gets too loud, before the offers start pouring in, before your name becomes the product, are you ready to become the architect of something that cannot be stolen? Because the next step requires more than creativity. It requires command. And most men, after tasting invention, are too soft to seize dominion. But maybe you're different. Maybe you've seen what happens when innovation becomes infrastructure. Maybe you're not just here to invent, you're here to install. Because at this level, power doesn't come from being the first to create. It comes from being the first to control the flow. Ideas are cheap. Systems are eternal. The innovator who survives is the one who builds distribution, not just brilliance. You stop being a creator and start becoming a gatekeeper. You no longer offer disruption. You decide who gets to disrupt. And the moment you reach that threshold, your influence stops being cultural and becomes structural. But this is where the cracks begin to show. Level 2 is seductive because it feels like transcendence. Your ideas spread, people talk, the old world trembles. But don't let that fool you, you're still vulnerable. Because innovation, no matter how genius, can always be bought, copied or buried, unless it's protected by capital, loyalty and silence. If you're not locking the doors behind you as you ascend, someone is already climbing your staircase. Influence at this level must become paranoid, not visibly, not emotionally, strategically. You must assume they are watching, because they are. You must assume they will try to replicate, because they will. The only question is, will they be too late? You're not climbing alone anymore. The moment your ideas gain traction, others attach themselves to you. Investors, imitators, parasites, lovers, opportunists. Some want to help you build, others want to feed. And if you can't tell the difference, you will rot from the inside out. This is not rebellion. This is not fire. This is surgery. Every conversation becomes calculated. Every handshake a transaction. Every smile a potential threat. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you're not ready. Because the men who endure level 2 are not just builders. They are surgeons of human intent. They cut deep, they cut quiet, and they remove threats before they speak. This is where you become dangerous. You're no longer creating for attention. You're creating outposts. Every product, every platform, every invention, it's a fortress, a foothold, a claim on the map of power. And if you're wise, you begin to interlink them. Ideas become assets. Assets become alliances. Alliances become empires. But here's the catch. The more you build, the more you must disappear. Your face becomes a liability. Your name becomes a target. You must learn to separate the self from the structure. Let your work be seen, not your weaknesses. Let your brand be loud while you go silent. Because noise attracts envy. And envy, at this level, is no longer passive. It's weaponized. Remember, people don't hate innovation. They hate the innovator. They hate what you reveal about them. That they stayed safe. That they followed rules. That they waited for permission while you forged a new path. And the more successful your disruption, the more it humiliates the ones who worshipped the old system. That humiliation breeds resentment. That resentment becomes sabotage. This is why most innovators collapse under pressure. They thought people loved them. They mistook applause for protection. But influence isn't protected by praise. It's protected by power, by having something they can't kill, even if they kill you. So test yourself now. What are you building that would survive if you vanished? What system continues when you fall silent? What asset operates even if your face disappears from history? Because that is the mark of influence. Not just the ability to make them look, but to make them dependent. At level 2, they admire you. At level 3, they need you. That's where we go next. Past the builder, past the creator, into the persona they can't stop watching. Not because you're brilliant, but because you are the mirror for everything they lack. But before we rise, one final warning. Creation, once successful, becomes a cage. The thing you built, it begins to own you. You're expected to evolve, to outperform, to always be the source. And if you don't evolve into something larger, something symbolic, you become a slave to your own invention. You become the product, and they will sell you until there's nothing left. So are you ready to ascend? Ready to become not just the man who builds, but the man they need to believe in? Because the next level is not about systems, it's about stories. And if you're not careful, the image they project onto you will be the same one that buries you. Now the lights find you, not because you chased them, but because your creation made too much noise to ignore. The innovator fades, and something more dangerous takes his place. The idol. You no longer build systems. You are the system. They don't just use what you made. They worship you for making it. This is level 3, not power through invention, but power through projection. You become a symbol, a myth, an idea wearing human skin. And that's when the real poison begins to drip. At this level, people stop seeing you. They see only what they need you to be. They crown you visionary, savior, genius, warrior, not because you are, but because they're starving for something to believe in. Your face becomes a canvas. Your voice becomes prophecy. But none of it is you. It's them, bleeding their unmet desires into your image. And if you're not careful, you start believing it. That is the idol's trap. To forget that worship is not love, it's dependency. And dependency is always unstable. Look closer. Celebrities, icons, viral names. They rise fast because they give the crowd something to feel. But the crowd is hungry, impulsive, shallow. They don't want truth, they want escape. And the moment you stop feeding that illusion, the moment your humanity leaks through, they turn. Because your power was never in you, it was in them. The idol lives and dies at the mercy of the masses. And the masses are fickle. One mistake, one scandal, one breath out of rhythm, and the thing they worship becomes the thing they burn. And here's the darkest truth. Some idols crave that death, because at least it makes them real again. When you live as a symbol, your real self begins to rot. You laugh for cameras, you cry on cue, you love in quotes. Everything becomes curated, filtered, edited for belief. You're no longer influencing, you're performing. And deep down, a part of you knows, this isn't power, this is prison. But the applause is addicting. So you stay, you pose, you post, you protect the image they've fallen in love with, and you pray they never see the cracks. But they will, because time exposes everything. And when it does, the idol faces a choice. Either evolve into something greater, something untouchable, or collapse under the weight of the myth. Because the truth is, fame is not influence. Visibility is not control. The world may know your name, but that doesn't mean it obeys it. And the moment you mistake recognition for dominion, you've already begun to fall. Influence that cannot convert into leverage is just a performance with better lighting. So how do you escape this level without being consumed by it? You stop feeding the fantasy. You build beneath the fame. You turn attention into infrastructure. Turn your face into a doorway, not the destination. Let the world obsess over your name while you quietly build a machine behind it. Let the fans watch while the architects follow. Because if you stay here, if you let the illusion become your kingdom, then the fall will be biblical. You will die in a golden cage, smiling for cameras while your empire withers unseen. But if you endure, if you rise through the idol phase without becoming its prisoner, then the next level becomes accessible. The level where fame becomes capital, and capital becomes command. This is where the smile fades, the lights dim, and the real work begins. Influence shifts from image to assets, from admiration to control, from myth to machine. Because the idol may be loved, envied, followed, but he is not feared. And until you are feared, you will never rule. Now the mask drops, the stage lights fade, the applause goes silent. You've had your moment in front of the crowd. Now you step behind the curtain to see who actually owns the theater. This is level 4, the tycoon. The man who converts admiration into assets, attention into infrastructure, visibility into ownership. He does not want to be adored. He wants to own the engine that powers your adoration. And this is where most idols are exposed. Because once the image fades, most have nothing left. They spent everything on being seen and forgot to build something that could survive being unseen. The tycoon operates in silence. While the idol is praised, the tycoon is paid. While others chase relevance, he purchases leverage. He doesn't argue for influence, he acquires it. And that acquisition is rarely emotional. It's cold, it's precise, and it's often invisible. Because the true tycoon doesn't flaunt wealth. He hides it behind shells, systems, proxies. Power is never in what you show, it's in what you control without being seen. And in this domain, influence is no longer about performance. It's about permission. Who gets in? Who gets access? Who gets funded? Who gets erased? But let's be clear, this level is not safe. In fact, it's more brutal than anything before it. Because money, once visible, becomes a magnet. Every ally becomes a potential thief. Every lover becomes a potential leak. Every deal becomes a battlefield masked in smiles and paperwork. You don't fight with fists here. You fight with clauses, audits, fine print, and silent wars of attrition. The battlefield is quiet, but the stakes are higher. Here, one signature can bury a man. One oversight can destroy a decade. And unlike the rebel or the idol, the tycoon dies in silence, with no sympathy and no one to blame but himself. That's why most men who rise to this level don't stay long, because it requires a new kind of discipline, emotional detachment. The tycoon cannot afford to be reactive. He cannot afford ego. He cannot crave recognition. His influence is in his ability to withdraw, to make moves that no one understands until it's too late. He does not announce his intentions. He waits, he calculates, he watches the market, not just of money, but of human behavior. And when the timing is right, he strikes. Not for clout, not for fame, for ownership. At this level, you start to understand the architecture of real influence. Influence that doesn't need to be loud. Influence that doesn't fade when the camera turns off. Influence that buys land while others are still buying followers. But with that clarity comes isolation. Because the higher you rise, the fewer people you can trust. Most men still think in applause. You now think in equity. Most men still trade time for money. You now trade money for control. And that shift from hustle to command will isolate you, but it will also free you. And yet, even this level has its limits. Because wealth is power until it isn't. There are rooms money can't enter, crowds it can't sway, forces it can't command. Eventually, every tycoon learns the painful truth. Money buys access, but it does not guarantee obedience. The rich man is admired, but he is still vulnerable, because all it takes is one narrative, one movement, one accusation, and the empire he built becomes a villain's origin story. That's why the tycoon must evolve again. He must learn to not just fund movements, but shape them. To not just own products, but control public will. Because the next level of influence is not economic, it is ideological. And if the tycoon does not rise to meet it, he will be devoured by it. The crowd that once admired him will demand his head, and the empire he built will be repainted as the enemy. So ask yourself, are you building for money or for command? Because what comes next cannot be purchased, it must be engineered. And if you're not prepared to shape minds instead of markets, then you will be remembered as just another man who mistook riches for rule. But money alone never ruled men. It bought their time, their labor, their silence, but never their hearts. The tycoon may control companies, buildings, and brands, but the next level commands crowds. This is level 5, the demagogue. The man who doesn't just purchase influence, he becomes it. He speaks, and millions adjust their behavior. He doesn't chase markets, he creates them. He doesn't chase followers, he forms belief. This is no longer economics. This is persuasion as power, psychological warfare at scale, the manipulation of mass perception until truth bends, facts blur, and the public obeys without knowing why. The demagogue's weapon is not truth, it's narrative. He doesn't need to be right. He needs to be believed. Influence here is not about facts, but frames. Not about logic, but emotion. And that is why this level is both seductive and terrifying. Because once you understand that people crave certainty more than reality, you can feed them anything. Lies, hope, blame, redemption, packaged properly, repeated endlessly, believed without question. The masses do not think in details. They think in symbols, and if you can become their symbol, their story, you become their god. But gods built by public belief are always at risk of public betrayal. That's the paradox of level 5. The more people you lead, the less you control them. You become a slave to your own myth. Every word must be calculated. Every silence, strategic. Every movement, rehearsed. Because you're no longer dealing with individuals, you're controlling mobs. And mobs are unstable. They love what feeds them. They kill what starves them. And the demagogue who loses touch with the pulse of his crowd doesn't fall slowly, he's devoured in a day. This is why true demagogues don't just command attention, they create enemies. They need villains to stay relevant, a threat to point to, a force to resist, because fear is the leash of the masses. Hope may attract, but fear locks them in place. This is the sick genius of level 5. You rise by giving people an enemy and convincing them that without you, that enemy wins. You become not just their leader, but their defense mechanism. They protect you, not because they trust you, but because they're terrified of life without you. But here lies the moral erosion. The demagogue begins as a speaker. He ends as a puppeteer. He no longer believes what he says. He believes in what his words do. He stops aiming for truth and starts aiming for effect. And the longer he plays this role, the more he forgets who he is. He becomes the narrative. He becomes the mask. And underneath, something begins to rot. Because when you bend reality long enough, eventually your own mind breaks. You start believing your own propaganda. And that's when you lose the most dangerous thing of all, clarity. Still, few ever reach this level, and fewer still survive it. Most demagogues are either assassinated, exiled, or publicly crucified. Because influence this large, this volatile, is rarely allowed to exist peacefully. If you fail to give the crowd what they want, they will bury you with the same passion they once praised you with. And if you give them too much, they'll outgrow you. Influence built on emotion is temporary, unless it evolves, unless it becomes institutional. And that is where the demagogue must turn next. Because there's a difference between commanding people and commanding structures. The first is loud, unstable, vulnerable. The second is silent, permanent, terrifying. The demagogue may move nations, but the man above him, he owns them. And until you rise to that level, your empire will always be held hostage by emotion, by chaos, by the moods of the mob. So the question now becomes, are you satisfied with being their voice, or are you ready to become their ruler? Because beyond the demagogue lies something even more rare. A man who no longer persuades the masses, he restructures the world they live in. Not with speeches, not with slogans, but with force, law, conquest. And once you rise there, the crowd no longer debates you. They kneel, and so the voices go silent. The applause fades into orders. The speeches are replaced by decrees. Because now, at level 6, you no longer ask to be followed. You command. This is the emperor, the man who doesn't chase belief, emotion, or applause. He seizes structure. He conquers systems. He does not bend with the winds of opinion. He controls the weather. And in his presence, the air changes. Men lower their eyes. Rivals go still. Allies wait for permission to speak. This is no longer persuasion. This is dominion. The demagogue moves hearts. The emperor moves borders. At this level, influence becomes force. Not brute violence, strategic enforcement. A kind of power that doesn't need to explain itself. You walk into a room, and deals are rewritten. You don't respond to challenges. They dissolve before they reach you. Why? Because now, your name carries consequence. Not gossip, not speculation, consequence. To insult you is to invite disappearance. To betray you is to vanish. And in this climate, loyalty becomes religion. People don't serve you out of love. They serve you out of fear, wrapped in awe. Because you've become the embodiment of something permanent, immovable, inescapable. But here's the hidden burden. The emperor no longer belongs to himself. He belongs to the machine he's built. He doesn't sleep without guard. He doesn't speak without surveillance. He cannot bleed without starting wars. Because every gesture is watched. Every silence is studied. Every decision echoes across thousands of lives. You are no longer a man. You are a myth with paperwork, and that myth must be protected at all costs. Because if the illusion fractures, if the people sense a crack, it doesn't matter how vast your empire is. They will come for the crown with 100 knives. The emperor's greatest threat is not rebellion, it's envy. The lie they tell is that power corrupts. No, power reveals. But envy corrupts others. And the moment you ascend, the moment you consolidate, the whispers begin. He has too much. He's lost touch. He needs to be stopped. And they won't say it to your face. They'll smile, shake your hand, eat your food, praise your genius. But in private, they'll build fires. They'll charm your lieutenants, seduce your advisors, corrode your fortress from within, because no man rules alone forever. Eventually, someone close will dream of your throne, and they won't even know they're dreaming until it's too late. So the emperor learns paranoia. Not weakness, survival. He stops trusting smiles. He checks every ledger. He knows what every general eats, who every advisor sleeps with, and what every rival fears. He is not warm, he is not casual, he is impossibly alert. Because empires do not fall from outside attack. They crumble from within, through rot disguised as loyalty, through loyalty that becomes ambition, and through ambition that becomes betrayal. This is the level where kings are poisoned, where generals vanish mysteriously, where oaths turn to ash in the dark. And yet, this is also the level where true legacy is born. Because if you survive here, if you maintain the crown without letting it destroy your mind, then you become something terrifyingly rare. You become history. Not a trend, not a movement, not a name on a headline. You become the age itself. Your decisions define eras. Your life becomes the blueprint others copy in shadows. And your enemies, even if they kill you, can't erase you. But to rise even higher, something must die. Because level 6 still clings to flesh, to name, to lineage, to gold, and all of that can still be burned. The next level, the final level, demands something colder, holier, eternal. The emperor commands the earth. But there is a place beyond this world where a man becomes untouchable, not because of what he owns, but because of what he represents. And to reach it, you must bury your name, your body, your very self, and rise as something else entirely. You were born flesh, but they now speak of you like myth. Not because you ruled, not because you conquered, but because you became something they could not kill. This is level 7, the divine. The final form of influence, where your name no longer needs breath to be spoken. You've crossed the line where men stop being remembered as people and start being invoked as forces. At this level, you are no longer seen, you are felt, a presence, a standard, a ghost wearing the robes of destiny. The emperor commands armies, the divine commands generations. But this is not given. This is not inherited. No crown, no vault, no title will carry you here. The divine level is chosen, not by men but by myth itself. You ascend when the world cannot explain itself without you. When your image, your words, your deeds are etched so deeply into the psychology of your time that to remove you would unravel the entire narrative. This is not power over land. It is power over memory, over story, over reality as it is told. And that power is almost godlike, because it lives long after your heart stops beating. But don't be deceived. The path here is soaked in blood. Not the blood of others, your own. You must die before you die. You must kill your need for praise, for family, for comfort, for identity. The divine man walks alone. His love is replaced with symbolism, his pain with reverence, and his soul, if it survives, becomes a beacon for men who will never meet him, but who will shape their entire lives around his ghost. This is the final sacrifice, immortality in exchange for isolation. To become untouchable, you must become unreachable. This is why so few ascend, because even emperors cling to the earth. They want legacy and pleasure, power and intimacy. But you, if you want the final crown, must become an idea too dangerous to destroy. The world must fear what would happen if you were erased. They must believe that without your symbol, chaos returns. That without your image, the sun doesn't rise the same. And to achieve that level of entrenchment, you must turn every weakness into legend, every scar into scripture, every silence into doctrine. The divine is not loud. He is inevitable. His face may be smeared, his quotes twisted, his story rewritten, but he always returns, because what he represents is not negotiable. He becomes the excuse for power, the mirror for revolution, the standard for rebellion. And whether he was righteous or cruel, generous or brutal, no one forgets him. He is tattooed onto the psyche of culture, not because he demanded it, but because reality bent to his rhythm and never quite straightened again. Think of those names, the ones history refuses to bury. Men whose actions ripple into laws, philosophies, religions, nations. They weren't just influential, they were foundational. Their mistakes became parables, their triumphs became prophecy. And whether they deserved it or not, they became immortal through repetition, through worship, through necessity. They outlived their biology. They infected time itself. But the danger here is also infinite. Because when men become symbols, the world feels entitled to use them, to distort them, to dress their corpse in costumes that serve agendas centuries later. You will be quoted by enemies, praised by men you would have loathed, used to justify movements you would have burned. That is the price. Once you become divine, you lose authorship of your own name. Your myth leaves your hands. It becomes property of the world. And the question is, can you stomach that? Can you build a life so powerful it consumes you? Can you vanish willingly into legend, knowing they will lie about you, worship you, hate you, need you forever? Because there is one final transformation left. One last descent before the ascent becomes absolute. And now we come to the end that is not an end. The final descent into fire before the ascent into forever. To rise beyond the flesh, beyond the mask, beyond even the myth, you must vanish into pure belief, not in yourself, not in the people, but in the story you leave behind. This is the last, unspoken rite of the divine, obliteration. The self must die entirely so the symbol can breathe without resistance. There is no room for contradiction, for nuance, for apology, only purity of narrative. You become the mirror through which others see themselves, not for who you were, but for what they need you to represent. And that is where true influence, eternal influence, is born, because it no longer relies on your presence. It moves without you. It spreads in whispers, in books, in statues, in tattoos, in revolutions. You are resurrected in classrooms, in sermons, in angry fists and trembling prayers. You are everywhere and nowhere, quoted, worshipped, blamed, feared. Your enemies become obsessed. Your allies become disciples. Your name triggers reactions in people who've never seen your face. You are now a trigger embedded in the timeline, and there is no going back. But here's what no one tells you. To reach this point, you must betray every part of yourself that wanted comfort. You must abandon the human needs that once anchored you, the desire to be understood, to be loved, to rest. The divine has no rest. His story must be repeated. His image must be maintained. Even in death, his legend must be managed. And if you are not careful, that legend will feed off of you until nothing of your true soul remains. This is the final paradox. To become immortal, you must sacrifice the very experience of being alive. Because legacy at this level is not warm, it is devouring. It demands consistency, control, curation. And once you hand yourself over to the myth, the world begins to use you. They will cite you to justify wars, invoke you to justify peace. You become the voice behind both mercy and cruelty, and you will have no way to answer back, no way to correct them, no way to say, "That's not what I meant," because you are no longer yours to defend. But in that silence, in that absence, you become something more powerful than presence. You become timeless strategy. You become a secret weapon dressed as philosophy. You become an unavoidable reference point. You're used in debates, rituals, rebellions. Your words are carved into institutions. Your principles are twisted into doctrines. And even your enemies cannot help but frame themselves in contrast to you. You are no longer a man. You are a measurement. This is the highest level of influence. Not to dominate people, not to lead them, but to haunt them. To linger inside decisions they don't even know were shaped by you. To infect their definitions of power, control, justice, and fear. The divine man stops existing long before they realize they're still obeying him. That is true power, not visibility, but permanence. Not applause, but architecture embedded in the psyche of civilization itself. But the road to this level is lined with graves, not of bodies, of selves. And you must ask, do you want to be loved, or do you want to be installed into history? Do you want to be safe, or do you want to shake the foundation of the ages? Because you cannot have both. One is fleeting, the other demands your name, your blood, your soul. Most men die rebels. A few rise to innovation. Fewer still become idols or emperors. But only the rarest, the mad, the ruthless, the willing to vanish, ever touch the divine. And once they do, they no longer walk among men. They become law written in shadow. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. Influence is not equal. Most will never rise above the first level. A rare few will touch the final stage, where power no longer needs to be seen, only felt. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to climb higher, to sacrifice comfort for command, to touch the level where influence becomes immortal? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I choose power. Let's see how many here are truly ready to ascend. And don't forget, keep watching the next video.